I was adjusting my hat in the hotel mirror, preparing for the reception, when my phone buzzed. It was Saturday evening, October 14th. A date that's burned into my memory forever. I was in Chicago, 600 miles from home, watching my grandson Tommy marry the love of his life. At 72, I don't travel much anymore, but this was different. This was family. The caller ID showed Lily Chen 4B, the sweet architecture student from my building who'd agreed to water my orchids while I was away. Lily had done this for me 3 times before, always reliable, always careful with my prized collection. When I answered, I expected to hear her cheerful voice asking about watering schedules or maybe reporting that everything was fine. Instead, her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with something I'd never heard from her before: pure terror. "Mrs. Walsh, is someone else supposed to be in your apartment?" My blood turned to ice. The hotel room suddenly felt stifling, the sounds of wedding celebration from downstairs fading into white noise. I gripped the phone tighter, my free hand instinctively reaching for the dresser to steady myself. "No, dear," I managed to say, my voice coming out strangled and tight. "Why? What's wrong?" There was a shaky breath on the other end, the kind of breath you take when you're trying to convince yourself that what you just experienced wasn't real. "I just saw a man in your living room. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing all black, a hoodie with the hood up. When he saw me through the doorway, Mrs. Walsh, he just vanished into thin air. Like he walked through the wall or something." The world tilted sideways. I was standing in a luxury hotel room 600 miles away, wearing my best dress and pearls, surrounded by the sounds of my family's joy, and my sanctuary, my home, was being violated by a stranger who apparently had the ability to disappear like smoke. "Lily, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I'd perfected during 35 years as a head librarian. "I need you to leave my apartment right now. Don't investigate, don't look around, just go straight to your grandmother's apartment and lock the door, then call building security immediately." "But Mrs. Walsh, I don't understand how he—" "Right now, Lily, please." I could hear her moving, her footsteps quick and nervous on my hardwood floors. The sound of my front door closing came through the phone like a gunshot, followed by the blessed mechanical beep of my security system engaging. "I'm in 4B now," she whispered. "Should I call the police?" "Yes, and building security. Tell them exactly what you told me. I'm booking the next flight home." I ended the call with shaking hands and immediately opened my airline app, my fingers fumbling over the screen as wedding music drifted up from the ballroom below. The next available flight wasn't until 11:45 p.m., more than 4 hours of not knowing what was happening in my home. 4 hours of imagining scenarios that made my chest tight with anxiety. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, please subscribe to our channel, because what I discovered when I got home changed everything I thought I knew about safety and trust. I called my son Michael to explain why I was leaving Tommy's reception early, but how do you explain something that sounds impossible? A man who vanishes into thin air sounded like the ramblings of an elderly woman whose mind was playing tricks on her. I could hear the concern in Michael's voice. Not concern for my safety, but concern for my mental state. "Mom, are you sure this girl isn't just confused? Maybe she saw shadows from car headlights, or maybe someone from maintenance was checking something and left through a different exit." Even my own son was ready to dismiss what Lily had seen, and I understood why. I lived on the 15th floor of a secure building with keycard access, security cameras, and a doorman. My apartment was my fortress, the place I'd retreated to after my husband Harold died 3 years ago. The idea that a stranger could not only enter that sanctuary but disappear within it was terrifying precisely because it seemed impossible. But as I sat in that hotel room, changing from my wedding outfit into travel clothes, I remembered something that made my hands shake even more. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been coming home from my weekly bridge game when I'd had the strangest feeling that someone was watching me in the elevator. I dismissed it as paranoia. After Harold's death, I'd become hyper-vigilant about personal safety, always looking over my shoulder, always double-checking locks. Now I wondered if that feeling hadn't been paranoia at all. The taxi ride to O'Hare Airport was a blur of Chicago streetlights and mounting anxiety. I kept checking my phone for updates from building security, from Lily, from anyone who could tell me what was happening in my home. But silence can be more terrifying than bad news, because silence leaves room for your imagination to create horrors worse than reality. I spent the 3-hour flight staring out the window into darkness, thinking about Harold and how safe I'd felt when he was alive. He was a practical man, an engineer who believed in logical explanations and systematic solutions. If Harold were still alive, he would have handled this crisis with calm efficiency, probably arriving home to find a reasonable explanation for everything. But Harold wasn't alive, and I was facing this alone. A 72-year-old widow whose sanctuary had been violated by someone who could apparently vanish into thin air. I had no idea that the man Lily saw in my apartment was just the beginning. I had no idea that the person I trusted most in the world was about to convince me that I was losing my mind to protect a secret that would destroy everything I thought I knew about family, safety, and trust. What I discovered when I finally got home wasn't just about a mysterious intruder who could disappear like smoke. It was about how the people closest to us can make us doubt our own perceptions when they have something to hide, and how sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones told by people who claim they're protecting us. By the time my plane touched down in Portland at 2:47 a.m., I thought the worst thing that could happen was finding out a stranger had been in my home. I was wrong. The worst thing that could happen was finding out that someone I trusted had been letting him in. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what my life had become after Harold died. For 48 years, he was my anchor, my decision maker, my shield against the world's uncertainties. When the cancer took him 3 years ago, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost my sense of how to navigate the world alone. That's when apartment 15C at the Meridian Tower became more than just where I lived. It became my sanctuary, my fortress, the one place where I could control every variable and feel completely safe. The apartment itself is beautiful, 1,200 square feet of carefully curated perfection overlooking the Willamette River. Floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room offer a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, and the eastern exposure means my orchids get perfect morning light. I have 17 of them now, each one positioned precisely according to its specific light and humidity needs. After Harold died, those orchids became my purpose. When grief made it hard to get out of bed, I had 17 living things depending on me for survival. When the silence in the apartment became overwhelming, I could lose myself in the precise science of their care. Measuring pH levels, adjusting humidity, monitoring for pests and diseases. But living alone at 72 made me hyper-aware of safety in ways I'd never been when Harold was alive. The Meridian Tower's security was one of the main reasons I'd chosen to stay here rather than move to a smaller place. Keycard access to the building, security cameras in all common areas, a 24-hour doorman, and a state-of-the-art alarm system in every unit. I'd developed rituals around security that made me feel in control. Double-locking the front door every time I entered or left, setting the alarm system religiously, even if I was just stepping onto the balcony, checking all windows before bed, though they don't open more than 4 inches anyway, a safety feature I'd insisted on when we first moved in. That's how I met Lily Chen. She moved into 4B with her grandmother about 2 years ago, a quiet architecture student at Portland State who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Mrs. Chen spoke limited English, and I could see Lily struggling to balance her studies with caring for an elderly relative while working part-time at the campus bookstore. I suppose I saw something of myself in her situation, the overwhelming responsibility of caring for someone you love while trying to maintain your own life. After Harold's diagnosis, I'd spent 2 years juggling his medical needs with my job at the library, never quite feeling like I was doing either well enough. When I learned that Lily had a natural gift with plants, her grandmother's apartment was filled with thriving specimens, I started asking her to check on my orchids when I traveled. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. She earned a little extra money, and I had someone I trusted caring for the living things that had become my primary companions. The trip to Chicago for Tommy's wedding was my first real family gathering since Harold's funeral. Tommy is my daughter Jennifer's son. Jennifer died in a car accident when Tommy was 8, and Harold and I helped raise him alongside his father. Watching him marry Sarah felt like closing a circle that had been broken by too much loss. I almost didn't go. The thought of leaving my apartment, my routines, my carefully controlled environment for 3 days felt overwhelming. What if something happened to the orchids? What if the building had a power outage and the humidity controls failed? What if? The endless cycle of worry that had become my constant companion since Harold's death. But Tommy called me personally, his voice carrying the same gentle persistence that had gotten him through losing his mother. "Grandma Margaret, this wedding won't be complete without you there. You're the only grandmother I have left, and Sarah's been looking forward to meeting the woman who taught me how to make proper tea." So I went. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to exist outside my carefully constructed safety zone. I bought a new dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons, elegant but not attention-seeking. I had my hair done at the salon for the first time since Harold's funeral. I even bought new luggage, as if investing in travel gear would somehow guarantee more adventures to come. The wedding weekend was magical in ways I hadn't expected. Tommy looked so much like Jennifer at that age, and seeing him happy felt like a gift from my daughter. Sarah's family welcomed me with genuine warmth, and for 3 days I remembered what it felt like to be part of something larger than my own grief and routines. Friday night was the rehearsal dinner, where I gave a speech about watching Tommy grow from a heartbroken 8-year-old into the confident young man standing before us. Saturday morning was the ceremony. Small and elegant, held in a historic hotel overlooking Lake Michigan. Sarah wore Jennifer's pearl necklace, something borrowed that made my heart full and broken at the same time. I'd been texting Lily regular updates throughout the weekend, partly to check on the orchids, but mostly because it felt good to share these moments with someone. Tommy looks so handsome in his tuxedo. The bride's bouquet has orchids. Made me think of you taking such good care of mine. Having the most wonderful time, but missing my green babies. Lily had responded with sweet, encouraging messages and photos of my orchids looking healthy and well-tended. "Mrs. Walsh, your white phalaenopsis is starting a new flower spike. Taking extra good care of her. All 17 accounted for and thriving. Enjoy every moment with your family." Everything was perfect. I was proud of myself for taking this leap, for allowing joy back into my life, for proving that a 72-year-old widow could still be adventurous and social and valuable to her family. Saturday evening, I was in my hotel room getting ready for the reception. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a burgundy dress that Harold had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. I was adjusting my hat in the mirror, thinking about how proud Harold would have been to see Tommy so happy, when my phone buzzed with what I assumed would be another cheerful update from Lily. Instead, it was the call that shattered not just my weekend, but my entire understanding of how safe I really was in the world. In 30 seconds, that phone call transformed me from a grandmother celebrating at a family wedding into a woman 600 miles from home, discovering that her sanctuary had been violated by someone who could apparently vanish into thin air. But what I didn't know yet was that the mysterious intruder was just the beginning of a deception so elaborate and heartless that it would make me question everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and my own ability to perceive reality. The beautiful weekend in Chicago, the perfect family celebration, the joy of reconnecting with life outside my carefully controlled world, all of it was about to become the backdrop for discovering that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden by the people who claim to love us most. I arrived at the Meridian Tower at 3:15 a.m. Sunday morning to find my worst fears confirmed, and somehow, simultaneously, my worst fears dismissed as impossible. The taxi pulled up to a building that looked like a crime scene. 2 Portland police cruisers sat in the circular drive, their red and blue lights painting the glass facade in ominous colors. Through the lobby windows, I could see uniformed officers talking to Jerry, our weekend night security guard, while a man in a suit took notes. My legs felt unsteady as I walked through those familiar doors, rolling my small suitcase behind me. Jerry's face showed relief when he saw me, but it was the kind of relief that comes with complications. "Mrs. Walsh, thank goodness you're home safe," he said, his voice carrying the careful tone people use when they're about to deliver news that isn't entirely good or entirely bad. "We've completed a thorough search of your apartment. Everything appears to be secure." Detective Carmen Rodriguez introduced herself as the lead investigator. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of practical demeanor that suggested she'd seen enough to be skeptical of everything, but compassionate enough to take every report seriously. "Mrs. Walsh, we've spent the last 3 hours going through your apartment with building security and our forensics team. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damage to the locks or security system. Your alarm was set and functioning properly. According to the building's key card logs, only your card and Miss Chen's temporary access card were used to enter your unit this weekend." They walked me through my own apartment like tourists, pointing out the undisturbed state of everything I held dear. My orchids sat in their perfect arrangement, healthy and unmolested. My jewelry box remained locked, my prescription medications untouched, my laptop sitting exactly where I'd left it on the dining room table. "We've checked every possible hiding place," Detective Rodriguez continued. "Closets, under beds, behind furniture, even the storage unit on your balcony. There's no one here, Mrs. Walsh. There's no evidence anyone was ever here." Lily was waiting in the lobby with her grandmother, both of them looking small and worried in the oversized leather chairs near the concierge desk. When Lily saw me, her eyes filled with tears, not of relief, but of frustration and fear. "Mrs. Walsh, I know what I saw," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I used my keycard to enter your apartment at approximately 7:20 p.m. I went straight to the kitchen to fill the watering can, like always. When I walked back toward the living room, I saw a man standing near your bookshelf." Detective Rodriguez took notes while Lily described the figure with the precision of someone who'd been replaying the scene in her mind for hours. He was tall, maybe 6 feet or a little more, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, black jeans or pants. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the hood, but he was definitely male, definitely adult. When I said hello, thinking maybe you'd come home early, he turned toward me for just a second, then walked toward the hallway that leads to your bedroom. I followed him because I was confused, not scared yet. But when I reached the hallway, he was gone. "Mrs. Walsh, there's nowhere to go in that hallway except your bedroom or the guest bathroom, and I checked both. He vanished." Detective Rodriguez asked the logical questions. Could it have been a maintenance worker? Could someone have left through another exit? Could shadows from passing cars have created an illusion? Lily's answers were firm and unwavering. No maintenance was scheduled. There is no other exit from that hallway. The man was three-dimensional, solid, real, not a shadow or reflection. That's when Patricia arrived. Patricia Morrison is my daughter-in-law, my son Michael's wife of 28 years. She's a retired nurse, practical and no-nonsense, the kind of person who approaches every problem with systematic logic and professional skepticism. When Michael called her about my emergency, she came immediately, still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. "Mom," she said, using the name she'd called me for nearly 3 decades, "you look exhausted. This must have been terrifying." But even as she hugged me, I could feel her evaluating the situation with the clinical detachment that had made her an excellent ICU nurse. She listened to Lily's account with the same polite attention she gave to confused patients who insisted they'd seen things that medication or stress had conjured. "Lily, honey," Patricia said, her voice carrying that gentle authority that healthcare workers use with agitated patients. "You've been under a lot of stress with school and caring for your grandmother. These old buildings make all kinds of noises, especially at night. The elevator machinery, the heating system, even the wind against those big windows can create sounds and shadows that our minds interpret as something else." She turned to Detective Rodriguez with the confidence of someone used to being the most rational person in the room. "Officer, my mother-in-law has been through significant trauma in recent years, losing her husband, adjusting to living alone, the normal anxieties that come with aging. It's possible that her concern about the apartment's security was communicated to Lily, who then experienced a kind of sympathetic anxiety response." The professional terminology, the reasonable explanations, the gentle but firm dismissal of what Lily had seen, it all began to work on me like a slow-acting poison. Here was my daughter-in-law, a medical professional with decades of experience, suggesting that the entire incident was essentially psychological rather than physical. "Patricia," I said, my voice smaller than I intended, "Lily has watered my plants several times before. She's never had any problems, never seen anything unusual." "Of course not," Patricia replied smoothly. "But this time was different because you were away for an emotionally charged event, your first family gathering since Harold died. Your anxiety about leaving your apartment, about something going wrong while you were gone, was probably more intense than usual. When you communicated with Lily about taking care of the orchids, you probably transmitted some of that anxiety without realizing it." Detective Rodriguez nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. "It's actually more common than you might think, Mrs. Walsh. High-stress situations can cause people to misinterpret sensory information. The important thing is that your apartment is secure, nothing is missing, and there's no evidence of any actual intrusion." I looked at Lily, this young woman who'd been nothing but honest and reliable for 2 years, and saw doubt creeping into her eyes. Not doubt about what she'd seen, but doubt about whether anyone would believe her. The weight of professional authority was pressing down on her account, making it seem less credible by the minute. "Mrs. Walsh," she said quietly, "I know what I saw, but maybe I was more nervous than usual about being in your apartment while you were away. Maybe my mind played tricks on me." Even she was starting to question herself. Patricia took charge of the situation with the efficiency that had made her invaluable during Harold's illness. She thanked the police for their thoroughness, assured them that I was just tired and overwhelmed, and promised to stay with me for the rest of the night to make sure I was comfortable and safe. "Let's get you some tea and help you unpack," she said, guiding me toward the elevator like an invalid. "You've had a shock, but everything is fine now. Tomorrow this will all seem like a bad dream." But as we rode up to the 15th floor, I caught a glimpse of Lily's face in the closing elevator doors. She looked small and defeated, like a child whose account of monsters in the closet had been dismissed by well-meaning adults who knew better. I gave Lily an extra $200, 0 cents for her trouble and trauma, but she almost refused to take it. "Mrs. Walsh, I don't want payment for lying or for being confused. I want you to know that I saw what I saw." Her conviction should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more unsettled, because if Lily was telling the truth, then all the reasonable explanations were wrong. And if all the reasonable explanations were wrong, then something impossible had happened in my apartment. Or something possible, but far more sinister than a simple break-in. Patricia tucked me into bed that night like I was a child recovering from a fever, checking that all the windows were locked, that the alarm system was set, that everything was secure and normal and safe. But as I lay in my own bed, in my own apartment, surrounded by all the familiar comforts that were supposed to make me feel protected, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. Not just in my apartment, but in my understanding of how well the people who loved me actually knew what I could handle. What I didn't know yet was that Patricia's reasonable explanations and professional reassurances weren't meant to comfort me. They were meant to keep me from discovering a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the lengths people will go to hide their secrets, even if it means making the people they love question their own sanity. The mysterious intruder who could vanish into thin air was real. But the real mystery wasn't how he'd gotten into my apartment. The real mystery was who had been letting him in. The gaslighting didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, systematic erosion of my confidence that unfolded over 6 weeks, each incident carefully explained away until I began to doubt my own ability to perceive reality accurately. It started just 3 days after I returned from Chicago. I was coming home from my Tuesday bridge game at the community center, something I'd done every week for 8 years. Bridge was one of the few social activities I'd maintained after Harold died, a 4-hour escape from the silence of my apartment, where I could engage my mind and strategy and enjoy the company of 3 other widows who understood grief without needing to discuss it. That Tuesday, October 17th, I unlocked my apartment door at exactly 4:30 p.m. I know the time because I always checked my watch when I got home, a habit from the days when Harold needed his medications at precise intervals. The moment I stepped inside, I caught a scent that didn't belong. It was aftershave, distinctly masculine with notes of sandalwood and something sharper, maybe cedar. Not Harold's cologne, which had been a light citrus scent that I'd loved for 48 years. This was heavier, more modern, the kind of fragrance a younger man might wear. The scent was strongest near my bookshelf, the same area where Lily had seen the mysterious figure. I followed it like a bloodhound, moving through my living room, but it seemed to dissipate as I approached, as if someone had recently passed through but was no longer there. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. No one. The alarm system showed no breaches, no entries or exits since I'd left for bridge at noon. When Patricia arrived for our standing Tuesday dinner, I mentioned the smell immediately. "I know this sounds strange," I said, "but I swear someone was in my apartment this afternoon. There was this unfamiliar aftershave smell near the bookshelf." Patricia moved through my living room like a detective, sniffing carefully near the bookshelf, by the windows, around the orchid arrangement. Her expression was patient but concerned, the look healthcare workers give patients who are reporting symptoms that don't match any known condition. "Mom, I don't smell anything unusual," she said gently. "These old buildings have shared ventilation systems. Maybe one of your neighbors has a male visitor, or maybe maintenance was using some kind of cleaning product that wafted through the vents." Her explanation was so reasonable, so logical, that I almost believed it myself. Almost. Thursday, October 26th. I woke up at 6:30 a.m., the same time I'd awakened every morning for the past 3 years. My routine was sacred. Harold's illness had taught me that structure was the only defense against chaos. But something was wrong with my bedside table. For 48 years of marriage, I'd placed my reading glasses on the right side of my bedside table every night before sleep. It was muscle memory, as automatic as breathing. Harold's side of the bed was the left, mine was the right, and my glasses always went on my side. That morning, they were on the left side of the table. I stood there in my nightgown, staring at those glasses, trying to reconstruct the previous evening. Had I been distracted? Had I somehow crossed to Harold's side of the bed and placed them there without thinking? Impossible. I hadn't set foot on Harold's side of the bed since the day he died. That space was sacred, untouched, still arranged exactly as he'd left it. But there were my glasses, sitting where Harold's water glass used to rest every night. Patricia listened to my account with the same patient concern she'd shown about the aftershave. "Mom, you've been under a lot of stress since the Chicago incident," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority I'd learned to associate with reasonable explanations. "Sometimes, when we're anxious or sleep-deprived, we do things automatically without forming clear memories of them. It's completely normal." She suggested I might benefit from keeping a sleep journal, tracking my evening routines to help identify patterns of stress behavior. My smart home system had been Harold's last gift to me, a comprehensive automation setup that controlled lighting, temperature, security, and energy monitoring throughout the apartment. He'd insisted on installing it during his final months, saying it would help me feel safer and more in control when I was living alone. The system sent weekly energy reports to my phone, detailed breakdowns of power consumption that had become oddly comforting in their precision and predictability. The report for the week of November 2nd showed an anomaly that made my hands shake. According to the data, my living room television had been on for 3 hours and 17 minutes during the night of November 3rd from 2:17 a.m. to 5:34 a.m. The power consumption pattern showed not just the TV, but also the cable box and sound system, as if someone had been actively watching programming. I was asleep by 10 p.m. that night. I never watched television after 9 p.m., and I certainly never left it running all night. The light would have kept me awake, and the electricity waste would have violated every frugal instinct Harold had instilled in me. The system also recorded 2 security sensor activations, the front door sensor at 2:17 a.m. and again at 2:23 a.m., followed by motion detection in the living room for the next 3 hours. When I called building security, they reviewed the hallway camera footage for that time period. Nothing. No one entering or leaving my apartment, no maintenance activity, no logical explanation for the sensor activations. Smart home systems are notorious for glitches, Patricia explained when I showed her the data. Electrical surges, software updates, even electromagnetic interference from storms can cause false readings. The important thing is that building security confirmed no one was actually in your apartment. She suggested I contact the system manufacturer about possible firmware updates or sensor calibration issues, but I knew what I hadn't told Patricia. That night, I'd awakened briefly around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I'd walked past my bedroom door, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of television audio coming from the living room. I dismissed it as noise from a neighboring apartment, but now I wondered if my unconscious mind had been trying to alert me to something my conscious mind wasn't ready to accept. Sunday, November 12th. I prepared my traditional Sunday dinner. Pot roast with vegetables, enough for several meals, because cooking for one had never felt natural. I always saved the leftovers in glass containers labeled with contents and dates, arranged systematically in my refrigerator. That week, I'd saved 2 portions of roast beef and vegetables in identical containers, planning to have them for Tuesday and Thursday dinners. Tuesday's container was gone. Not moved, not misplaced, gone. I searched my entire kitchen, checked the garbage disposal, even looked in the freezer thinking I might have absent-mindedly stored it there. Nothing. I called Patricia in a state of agitation that surprised even me. "Someone was in my apartment," I said, my voice higher than normal. "Someone took my leftover pot roast." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough for me to hear my own words and realize how they sounded. An elderly woman calling her daughter-in-law to report stolen leftovers. "Mom," Patricia said gently, "think about this logically. Who would break into your apartment to steal pot roast? Your security system shows no breaches. Building security has no record of any unauthorized entries. Isn't it more likely that you threw it away and forgot? Or maybe ate it without paying attention?" She was right, of course. It did sound ridiculous. But I knew my own habits, my own routines, with the precision of someone whose life had been structured around caring for details. "You know how you worry about food safety?" Patricia continued. "Maybe you saw something that concerned you, maybe the container looked cloudy or the meat seemed off, and you disposed of it as a precaution. Sometimes our minds protect us from remembering unpleasant decisions." Her explanation was so reasonable that I almost accepted it. Almost. My white Phalaenopsis orchid sits in the eastern window, positioned precisely to receive morning light but avoid the harsh afternoon sun that could damage its delicate petals. I water it every 12 days, on a schedule I've maintained for 3 years with the consistency of a religious ritual. According to my care journal, this orchid had been watered on November 10th. It wasn't scheduled for water again until November 22nd. On November 18th, the soil was damp. Not just slightly moist from humidity, but freshly watered, with small droplets still visible on the leaves and the distinctive smell of wet bark that accompanies recent watering. I checked my journal 3 times, counted the days forward and backward, even consulted the calendar to make sure I hadn't lost track of dates. There was no mistake. Someone had watered my orchid 6 days ahead of schedule. Mrs. Rodriguez from the 12th floor cornered me at the mailboxes on November 25th with the kind of awkward conversation that signals neighborhood concern about an elderly resident's mental state. Margaret, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you feeling all right lately? She'd seen me coming home very late on Tuesday night, November 21st. Around 11:15 p.m., she said. I was wearing my navy blue coat and carrying what looked like grocery bags, moving slowly toward the elevator like someone who was tired or possibly unwell. The problem was, I'd been asleep by 9 p.m. on November 21st. My keycard data could prove it. I'd last entered the building at 4:30 p.m. that day after my weekly grocery shopping, and I hadn't left the apartment again. Someone matching my general description, elderly woman, gray hair, navy coat, had been seen in the building that night. But it wasn't me. By Thanksgiving week, I was keeping a detailed journal of every incident, every anomaly, every moment when my reality didn't match the evidence around me. The notebook filled with entries that read like the observations of someone losing touch with the fundamental ability to perceive and remember accurately. November 26th. Found kitchen towel folded differently than my usual method. Patricia suggests muscle memory changes with age. November 28th. Alarm system shows front door sensor activation at 3:42 a.m. Building security finds no explanation. Patricia recommends system maintenance check. November 30th. Discovered unfamiliar fingerprint smudges on bathroom mirror. Patricia suggests cleaning lady may have used different products that show prints more easily. Each incident had a reasonable explanation. Each anomaly could be attributed to stress, aging, or simple misperception. But the cumulative effect was devastating. I was losing confidence in my most basic ability to navigate reality accurately. The woman who had survived Harold's illness with grace and strength, who had managed our household finances and social obligations with precision for decades, was being transformed into someone who couldn't trust her own perceptions about whether she'd eaten leftovers or properly watered her plants. What I didn't know yet was that every single incident had been real. Every unexplained smell, every moved object, every digital anomaly, every missing item was evidence of exactly what I suspected. Someone was in my apartment when they shouldn't have been. But the person systematically convincing me that I was imagining these things wasn't trying to protect my mental health. They were trying to protect a secret that was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. The most insidious thing about gaslighting isn't that it makes you doubt specific incidents. It's that it makes you doubt your fundamental ability to trust your own mind. And once someone has convinced you that you can't trust your own perceptions, you become completely dependent on their version of reality, even when their version is designed to hide the truth that could set you free. December 5th was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a detective. I was dusting my bookshelf, the same bookshelf where Lily had seen the mysterious figure, the same area where I'd smelled unfamiliar aftershave, when my cleaning cloth caught on something that shouldn't have been there. Out of habit, I picked it up and swiped it away, but the damage was behind my leather-bound volume of Emily Dickinson poetry. Tucked into the narrow space between the book and the wall was a small object, taped to the back of the shelf, where it would be invisible unless you were looking directly behind the books. My hands shook as I carefully peeled away the tape. It was a small key, not one of mine, not anything I recognized, attached to a folded piece of paper. The paper was white notebook paper, torn from a spiral-bound pad, with handwriting I'd never seen before. Written in blue ink in careful block letters was my building's Wi-Fi password, Meridian Guest 2023. Below that, in the same handwriting, 15C, Margaret usually home by 4:30 p.m. weekdays, bridge Tuesdays until 4:30, grocery shopping Thursdays to 4 p.m. Patricia visits 2/Thurs evenings. Someone had been studying my life, documenting my routines with the precision of a professional stalker. But this wasn't random. This was someone who knew enough about my habits to chart them accurately, someone who had access to information about my weekly schedule. The key was small and brass, the kind that might open a mailbox or storage unit. But attached to the keyring was something that made my blood freeze. A plastic tag with my building's logo and the number 15C printed in the management office's standard format. This was a spare key to my apartment. Instead of calling Patricia or building security or the police, I did something that 6 weeks of gaslighting had taught me to do. I gathered evidence before telling anyone what I'd discovered. I photographed the key and note from every angle, documenting exactly where I'd found them, how they'd been hidden, what they meant. Then I sat in my living room and forced myself to think logically about what this discovery proved. Someone had been in my apartment regularly enough to justify hiding supplies here. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to move freely without being detected. Someone who had legitimate access to a spare key, but was using it for purposes I hadn't authorized. I needed to catch this person in the act, but I also needed to understand who was enabling their access to my home. The key didn't answer the most important question. How had someone gotten a duplicate of my apartment key without my knowledge? That's when I decided to set a trap. I told Patricia I was going to visit my sister Ellen in Seattle for the weekend, a trip I'd been talking about for months but never actually planning. The story was believable because Ellen had been inviting me to visit since Harold's funeral, and Patricia had been encouraging me to be more social and adventurous. "I think it's wonderful that you're finally ready for another trip," Patricia said when I called her Thursday evening. "After Chicago went so well, maybe you're feeling more confident about traveling again." Instead of going to Seattle, I checked into the Hotel Portland across the street from my building. Room 847 had a direct view of the Meridian Towers entrance and the 15th floor where my apartment was located. I told the hotel staff I was a researcher working on a project that required observing traffic patterns around the building. Not entirely a lie, since I was researching who was trafficking through my home without permission. Friday evening, December 8th, I positioned myself at the window with a pair of binoculars I'd borrowed from Harold's birdwatching equipment and waited to see who would take advantage of my supposed absence. At 7:23 p.m., I watched Patricia enter the Meridian Tower through the main entrance, using her own keycard that I'd given her for emergency access after Harold died. Nothing unusual about that. She often checked on my apartment when I was away, watering plants and making sure everything was secure. But at 8:47 p.m., I saw someone else enter the building. A tall man in a dark hoodie, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. He used a keycard at the main entrance, took the elevator to the 15th floor, and disappeared from my view into the part of the building where my apartment was located. I watched my building until nearly midnight, taking notes on every person who entered or left, every light that went on or off in the visible apartments. At 11:23 p.m., the man in the hoodie emerged from the building, walking quickly toward the parking garage with the purposeful movement of someone who had finished a task. 15 minutes later, Patricia left the building, looking around carefully before getting into her car. Saturday, I repeated the surveillance with the same results. Patricia arrived around 7 p.m., the mysterious man entered around 8:45 p.m., and both left within minutes of each other around 11 p.m. Sunday evening, I returned to my apartment to wait for Patricia's usual Monday visit. I arranged the hidden key and note exactly where I'd found them, set up a small digital recorder in my living room, and prepared for a conversation that would either restore my sanity or destroy my relationship with the only family member I trusted completely. Patricia arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, carrying groceries for our traditional Monday dinner. She moved through my apartment with the familiar ease of someone who'd been coming here for 3 years, chatting about her weekend and asking about my trip to Seattle. "Ellen says to tell you hello," I said, serving the lie as smoothly as I served dinner. "She was so glad I finally made the trip." "I'm proud of you for being adventurous," Patricia replied. "After all the anxiety you've had about leaving the apartment, it's wonderful to see you getting your confidence back." After dinner, as Patricia was loading the dishwasher, I placed the key and note on the kitchen counter where she couldn't miss them. "Patricia," I said, my voice carrying a tone she'd never heard from me before, "I need you to explain what this is." The silence that followed was profound. I watched Patricia's face go through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, resignation, and finally a kind of defeated exhaustion that told me everything I needed to know. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden behind my books, where someone thought I'd never look," I replied. "Someone who's been documenting my schedule, studying my routines, treating my home like their personal hotel." Patricia's composure, the professional authority that had defined our relationship for 6 weeks, cracked completely. The confident healthcare worker, who'd had reasonable explanations for every anomaly, dissolved into a woman who looked smaller and more frightened than I'd ever seen her. "Margaret, I can explain," she said, but her voice carried the desperation of someone who knew no explanation would be adequate. "Can you?" I demanded, my voice gaining strength with every word. "Can you explain why you've been letting someone into my apartment? Can you explain why you've spent 6 weeks convincing me I was losing my mind when you knew exactly what was causing every strange incident I reported?" The truth came out in fragments, each revelation more devastating than the last. The man in the hoodie was Derek Morrison, Patricia's younger brother, recently released from a 10-year prison sentence for embezzlement and fraud. He'd been living in various shelters and transitional housing since his release, but his criminal record made finding permanent housing almost impossible. "Is sleeping in his car, Margaret," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "It's winter. He has no money, no job prospects, nowhere to go. He came to me desperate, and I couldn't just let him freeze." Patricia had been using her emergency key to let Derek stay in my apartment while I was out or sleeping. The arrangement had started small, just letting him shower and sleep on my couch occasionally, but had evolved into regular occupancy whenever my schedule provided opportunity. "The night Lily saw him, he was supposed to leave before 7 p.m., Patricia continued, "but he fell asleep on your couch and didn't wake up until she was already in the apartment. He panicked and hid in your bedroom closet until she left, then escaped through the fire stairs." Every incident I'd reported over the past 6 weeks had been real. Derek had been using my shower, eating my food, watching my television, even sleeping in my guest bedroom when Patricia was confident I wouldn't discover him. The aftershave smell, Derek's cologne, the moved glasses. He'd been sleeping in Harold's side of the bed when the guest room felt too risky. The digital anomalies, Derek watching television and moving through my apartment during the night. The missing food, Derek eating leftovers when he was hungry. But the most devastating revelation was Patricia's systematic gaslighting campaign. "I convinced myself I was protecting you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought if you knew Derek was here, you'd be terrified, or you'd insist we call the police and he'd go back to prison. I told myself that a few white lies were better than putting you through that trauma." "A few white lies?" I said, my voice rising with 40 years of suppressed anger at being managed and protected without my consent. "Patricia, you made me think I was developing dementia. You made me question my own sanity. You watched me spiral into self-doubt and confusion, and you actively encouraged it to cover up your brother's illegal presence in my home. You didn't just lie to me. You systematically destroyed my confidence in my own perceptions. You made me afraid of my own mind." I gave Patricia and Derek exactly 24 hours to remove all his belongings and return any copies of my apartment key. I informed them that Derek was permanently banned from my building and that Patricia's emergency access was immediately revoked. "If I see either of you in this apartment again without my explicit invitation, I will call the police and press charges for trespassing, breaking and entering, and elder abuse," I said with the authority of someone who had finally reclaimed her power. Patricia's betrayal cut deeper than Derek's trespassing because it had been wrapped in love and concern. She hadn't just enabled her brother's illegal occupancy, she'd weaponized my grief, my age, and my trust to make me doubt my own reality. For 6 weeks, she'd watched me suffer, had actively encouraged my fears about mental decline, all to protect a secret that violated everything I thought I knew about consent, autonomy, and respect. The mysterious intruder who could vanish into thin air was real, He'd been hiding in my closets and disappearing through fire exits. But the real crime wasn't breaking and entering. The real crime was the systematic psychological manipulation that had nearly convinced me I couldn't trust my own mind. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't told by strangers who break through windows. They're told by family members who use love as a weapon and protection as an excuse for control. The truth wasn't that I was losing my mind. The truth was that I was living with people who were willing to let me think I was crazy, rather than have an honest conversation about their problems. Lily Chin had been right from the very beginning. There was someone in my apartment who shouldn't have been there. The mystery was never how he got in. The mystery was who loved me enough to gaslight me to keep him hidden. The aftermath of discovering Patricia's deception lasted far longer than the 6 weeks of gaslighting that preceded it. When trust is systematically destroyed by someone you love, rebuilding it, with them or with anyone else, becomes a careful, deliberate process that changes you in ways you never expected. The immediate consequences were swift and non-negotiable. Within 48 hours, I had changed every lock in my apartment, installed additional security cameras in the hallway and living areas, and revoked all emergency access, except for building management. The locksmith, a kind man named Robert, who'd been securing apartments in this building for 15 years, didn't ask questions about why a 72-year-old woman suddenly needed fortress-level security in a luxury high-rise. "Sometimes people surprise us," he said simply as he installed the third deadbolt. "Better to be safe than sorry." Derek Morrison removed his belongings Sunday night with the efficient shame of someone who understood he'd been caught in an indefensible situation. He left no note, no apology, no acknowledgement that his presence had terrorized an elderly woman and nearly convinced her she was losing her mind. Patricia supervised his departure with the grim efficiency of someone managing a crisis she'd created but couldn't control. The legal ramifications were more complex than I'd initially anticipated. Derek's parole officer, when informed of his unauthorized residence in my apartment, initiated violation proceedings that sent him back to county jail pending a hearing. Patricia faced potential charges as an accessory, but after consulting with a victim's advocate, I decided not to pursue prosecution against her. "She's not a criminal," I told Detective Rodriguez during our final interview. "She's a woman who made catastrophically bad decisions to help her brother, then compounded those decisions with lies that nearly destroyed my mental health. Prison won't fix the damage she's done to our relationship." But the family fractures were immediate and severe. My son Michael initially took Patricia's side, viewing the entire situation as a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand, rather than a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation. "Mom, Patricia was trying to help her brother and protect you from worry," he said during a phone call that lasted 3 hours and resolved nothing. "Yes, she made mistakes, but her intentions were good. Derek needed help, and she was trying to provide it without causing you stress." "She made me think I was developing dementia, Michael," I replied, my voice carrying a hardness he'd never heard before. "She watched me question my own sanity for 6 weeks rather than have an honest conversation about her brother's situation. That's not protection. That's abuse." The extended family chose sides with the kind of divisive loyalty that destroys relationships for generations. Patricia's sister and mother believed I was overreacting, that family should help family regardless of inconvenience, that my vindictive response was evidence of the mental instability Patricia had been trying to manage. But something remarkable happened during those first weeks after the truth came out. I discovered that I was stronger, more capable, and more resilient than anyone, including myself, had given me credit for. The woman who'd been convinced she couldn't trust her own perceptions turned out to have been perceiving reality with perfect accuracy. The elderly widow who'd been treated like a fragile invalid turned out to be capable of conducting surveillance, gathering evidence, and confronting dangerous lies with strategic precision. One of my first acts after changing the locks was to visit Lily Chen with a formal apology and a complete explanation of what had really happened in my apartment. "Lily, you were right about everything," I said, standing in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by the thriving plants that had first made me trust this young woman's judgment. There was a man in my apartment. He was real. He was unauthorized, and you were brave enough to trust what you saw, even when everyone else dismissed it. Lily's response was generous beyond what I deserved. Mrs. Walsh, I'm just glad you're safe. I kept wondering if I should have called the police anyway, even after everyone said I was confused. I'm sorry I doubted myself. Never apologize for doubting yourself when powerful people are telling you to, I replied. Your instincts were perfect. Mine were too. We just needed to learn to trust them more than we trusted other people's reasonable explanations. The most profound change wasn't in my living situation or family relationships. It was in my understanding of my own capabilities and worth. For 3 years after Harold's death, I'd allowed grief and loneliness to convince me that I needed protection, management, and careful monitoring by people who supposedly knew better than I did what I could handle. Patricia's betrayal, devastating as it was, forced me to reclaim my autonomy in ways I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. I joined a support group for elder abuse survivors at the community center, discovering that my experience was far more common than I'd imagined. Financial manipulation, emotional gaslighting, and protective deception were epidemic among elderly people whose families had decided they were too fragile for truth or too confused for self-determination. The most insidious form of elder abuse, our group facilitator explained, is the kind that comes wrapped in love and concern. When family members convince us that we can't trust our own judgment, that we need their protection from reality, that our perceptions are unreliable, that's not care. That's control. I began speaking at senior centers and community organizations about recognizing psychological manipulation disguised as family care. My story, the mysterious intruder who turned out to be real, the gaslighting campaign that nearly convinced me I was losing my mind, resonated with audiences who'd had similar experiences but lacked the vocabulary to name what had happened to them. 6 months after Derek's removal from my apartment, Patricia reached out through Michael, asking if we could meet to discuss rebuilding our relationship. The conversation, held in a neutral location at the community center, was painful but necessary. Margaret, I know I destroyed your trust, she said, her voice carrying genuine remorse that felt different from the manipulative concern I'd learned to recognize. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from having a difficult conversation about Derek's situation. You weren't protecting me from anything, Patricia, I replied. You were protecting Derek from the consequences of his choices, and you were protecting yourself from the discomfort of asking for help. But you did it at the expense of my mental health and autonomy. The conditions I set for any future relationship were non-negotiable. Complete honesty about family situations that might affect me, respect for my right to make my own decisions about what I could handle, and an end to the paternalistic assumption that age or widowhood had diminished my judgment. If Derek or any other family member needs help in the future, you ask me directly, I said. You don't manage my reality to avoid difficult conversations. You don't make unilateral decisions about what I'm allowed to know or what I'm capable of handling. Patricia agreed to these terms and to joint counseling sessions to address the power dynamics that had made her deception possible. The relationship we're rebuilding is different from what we had before. More honest, more equal, but also more fragile because it's based on earned trust rather than assumed family loyalty. If you're enjoying stories about resilience and finding your voice after betrayal, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of overcoming family manipulation and reclaiming personal power. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about home security or family dynamics. It was about the difference between genuine care and controlling behavior disguised as protection. People who truly love us don't need to make us doubt our own perceptions to help us. They don't need to manage our understanding of reality to keep us safe. They don't need to lie to us to spare us from difficult truths. If someone in your life is making you question your own memory, your own perceptions, your own ability to interpret reality accurately, pay attention to that feeling. Your instincts are trying to protect you from something, even if you can't yet identify what that something is. Trust yourself first. Seek reasonable explanations second. But never let anyone convince you that your fundamental ability to perceive reality is compromised just because your perceptions are inconvenient for them. I'm 73 years old now, living alone in an apartment that feels genuinely safe for the first time in years. My orchids are thriving, all 17 of them, tended according to schedules I create and maintain without anyone's supervision or second guessing. Lily Chen still waters them when I travel, which I do more frequently now. Last month, I visited Tommy and Sarah for their first wedding anniversary, and next spring I'm planning a trip to see my sister Ellen in Seattle. A trip I'll actually take this time. Derek Morrison completed his parole violation sentence and moved to California, where Patricia's other relatives have been helping him rebuild his life through honest means rather than deceptive ones. I wish him well, but I'm grateful he's rebuilding somewhere far from my home. The mysterious intruder who could vanish into thin air turned out to be a desperate man hiding in closets and escaping through fire exits. But the real mystery was never how he got into my apartment. The real mystery was how someone I trusted with my vulnerability and grief used that trust to convince me I couldn't rely on my own mind. The answer is simpler and more painful than I wanted to accept. When people we love have problems they are ashamed to discuss, they sometimes find it easier to make us doubt our sanity than to trust us with their truth. Your perceptions matter. Your instincts matter. Your right to know what's happening in your own life matters more than other people's comfort with difficult conversations. The next time someone tries to convince you that you're confused, paranoid, or losing touch with reality, remember this: sometimes the most dangerous intruders aren't the ones who break through windows. They're the lies that slip in through love and hide in the shadows of our most trusted relationships. Trust yourself. You're probably right, even when everyone else says you're wrong. Especially then. The people who truly love us don't need to gaslight us to protect us. They trust us enough to tell us the truth, even when the truth is difficult. Everything else is just control wearing the mask of care.